vast Atlantic Ocean is a graveyard of secrets where the line between the living and the dead becomes blurred by the endless gray horizon. It was here, in the winter of 1872, that a mystery was born that would haunt the maritime world for centuries to come. The waters were calm, yet they held a tension that felt like a held breath, waiting for a scream that never came. In this desolation, a ship appeared like a specter, rising from the mist, drifting aimlessly, without direction or purpose. It was not merely a vessel lost at sea, but a floating tomb that carried no bodies, only the heavy, suffocating weight of silence. On the afternoon of December 4th, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was navigating the choppy waters between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. Captain David Morehouse stood on the deck, peering through his spyglass at a vessel, spotting a ship moving in a strange and erratic fashion. The sails were set in a disorderly manner, and the ship seemed to yaw against the wind, as if no hand guided the wheel. It was a sight that sent a shiver down the spine of every seasoned sailor on board, for a ship without a master is an omen of doom. Morehouse recognized the vessel as the Mary Celeste, an American merchant brigantine that had left New York just days before him. A signal was raised to communicate with the strange vessel, but the flags snapped in the wind unanswered, and the silence from the Mary Celeste was louder than the roaring waves. There was no sign of life on the deck, no movement at the rail, and no smoke rising from the galley chimney. The unease among the crew of the Dei Gratia grew into a palpable fear as they realized they were approaching a ghost ship. The ocean around them seemed to darken, and the wind carried a cold bite that felt unnatural. They lowered a small boat to investigate, unaware that they were about to step into a mystery that defied all logic. To understand the horror of what was found, we must look back to the beginning of the voyage, which began under the most ordinary of circumstances. The Mary Celeste was a beautiful ship commanded by Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of high standing and deep religious faith. He was accompanied by his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, along with a crew of 7 experienced sailors. They were bound for Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. The manifest was clear the ship was sound, and the crew was handpicked for their reliability and skill. There was no reason to suspect that this voyage would be their last. The ship departed from New York on November 7th into the biting cold of an early winter, facing headwinds and rough seas from the very start. Captain Briggs was a seasoned mariner who had spent his life on the water, and he navigated the treacherous weather with a steady hand. His letters home spoke of optimism and a deep love for his family, and his ship showing no signs of distress or madness. Yet as the Mary Celeste pushed further into the Atlantic, the weather worsened, and the ocean began to batter the wooden hull with relentless fury. The ship groaned under the strain, but she held together, strong and true, against the elements. Life aboard the Mary Celeste during those first few weeks was likely a routine of hard work and quiet domesticity for the Briggs family. Sarah Briggs tended to young Sophia in the cabin, while the men worked the rigging and scrubbed the decks above. The smell of the sea mixed with the faint, acrid scent of the alcohol in the hold, a constant reminder of the volatile cargo beneath their feet. There were no reports of discord among the crew, and the ship was well provisioned with food and water for 6 months. It seemed to be a voyage like any other destined for a safe arrival in the Mediterranean sun. However, the Atlantic Ocean is a fickle mistress, and the weather turned foul as they approached the Azores, bringing storms and high swells. The logbook found later would show nothing out of the ordinary regarding the navigation or the condition of the ship. The last entry was dated November 25th, placing them 6 miles off the island of Santa Maria. After that date, the record falls silent, leaving a gap of 9 days between the last known position and the discovery by the Dei Gratia. What transpired in those 9 missing days is a blank page in history, written in fear and desperation. As the boarding party from the Dei Gratia climbed onto the deck of the Mary Celeste, they were met with an eerie stillness that chilled them to the bone. The sails were partly set, but some were torn and hanging in tatters, flapping uselessly in the breeze. Ropes coiled on the deck were soaked through, and the wheel stood unmanned, spinning idly with the motion of the waves. There was not a soul to be seen, not a voice to be heard, only the creaking of the timber and the slap of water against the hull. It was as if the people had simply evaporated into the salt air. Oliver Devoe, the chief mate of the Dei Gratia, led the search, and his footsteps echoed loudly on the hollow wooden planks. He called out for Captain Briggs, but his voice was swallowed by the emptiness of the ship. They checked the crew quarters, finding sea chests packed with personal belongings, and rain gear still waiting for owners who would never return. Pipes containing unsmoked tobacco were left on tables, and razor kits were laid out, as if the men were in the middle of their daily routines. The suddenness of the abandonment was evident in every untouched item left behind. The search moved to the captain's cabin, where the scene became even more unsettling in its normalcy and domestic arrangement. A melodeon stood in the corner, and books were neatly arranged on the shelves, including a Bible. Toys belonging to little Sophia were scattered on the floor, a haunting reminder of the innocent life that had been on board. The bed was unmade, with the impression of bodies still visible on the sheets, as if they had just risen. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, and no evidence of violence anywhere in the living quarters. Descending into the hold, the men found the cargo of alcohol largely intact, 9 barrels were later found to be empty. There was nearly 4 feet of water in the hold, which was a significant amount, but not enough to sink a ship of that size. The pumps were in working order, yet they had been dismantled and left on the deck, suggesting a moment of panic. The sounding rod, used to measure water levels in the hold, was found discarded on the deck. It seemed that fear had gripped the crew, causing them to abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the ocean. The most chilling discovery was the state of the single lifeboat, which was missing from its davits, along with the peak halyard. A section of the ship's rail had been removed to facilitate the launch of the small boat into the heaving sea. It appeared that all 10 souls had crowded into a tiny, fragile boat in the middle of the vast Atlantic. They had taken the ship's chronometer and sextant, but left behind the ship's log and their personal possessions. This decision to leave the safety of the large ship for a small boat suggests a terror so great that it overrode all reason. The boarding party stood on the deck of the Mary Celeste, baffled by what they saw and what they did not see. There was enough food and water to last for months, so starvation or thirst was not the cause of their departure. The ship was structurally sound despite the water in the hold, and could have easily been pumped out. There was no fire damage and no sign of explosion despite the volatile cargo of alcohol. The mystery deepened with every step they took, as every logical explanation was dismantled by the evidence before their eyes. As twilight began to fall, the atmosphere on the abandoned ship grew heavy with a sense of unseen presence. The sailors from the day Gracia felt like intruders in a house where the owners were watching from the shadows. The wind whistling through the rigging sounded like whispered warnings, urging them to leave this cursed place. They decided to split the crew and sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar to claim the salvage rights. But even as they took command of the wheel, they could not shake the feeling that they were not alone on that drifting vessel. The journey to Gibraltar was a nightmare for the men assigned to sail the Mary Celeste across the remaining miles. The ship seemed to resist their control, moving sluggishly and groaning with every swell of the sea. At night, the crew reported hearing strange sounds, below deck footsteps, pacing in the empty cabins, and the faint cry of a child. They slept in shifts, terrified to close their eyes, for too long lest they wake up to find themselves vanishing too. The superstitious sailors believed the ship was cursed or possessed by whatever force had taken Captain Briggs and his family. When they finally arrived in Gibraltar, the authorities were immediately suspicious of the story told by the crew of the day Gracia. The Attorney General of Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood, was convinced that a foul crime had been committed. He suspected mutiny, piracy, or an insurance fraud scheme orchestrated by the captains of both ships. The investigation that followed was exhaustive and aggressive, tearing apart the ship in search of blood or hidden treasure. They found what they thought were bloodstains on a sword and the rail, but tests later proved them to be rust. The theory of mutiny was explored in depth, but the character references for the crew of the Mary Celeste were impeccable. These were men of good standing known for their loyalty and lack of criminal history or violent tendencies. Furthermore, there was no sign of violence on the ship, no broken furniture, and no weapons left out. If the crew had mutinied, why would they abandon the ship and all their possessions in the middle of the ocean? The logic of a mutiny crumbled under the weight of the untouched cargo and personal items. Another theory suggested that the crew of the Dei Gratia had murdered those on the Mary Celeste to claim the salvage. However, the timeline and the locations of the two ships made this practically impossible to coordinate. Captain Morehouse was a friend of Captain Briggs, and the two had dined together in New York before departing. There was no motive for such a heinous act between friends and respected professionals. The court ultimately could not find evidence of foul play by the salvagers, but the shadow of suspicion hung over them for the rest of their lives. Science tried to offer explanations involving the cargo of industrial alcohol and the effects of fumes in the hold. Some speculated that the barrels leaked, causing a buildup of explosive fumes that terrified the captain. Perhaps a small explosion blew off the hatch, covers convincing Briggs that the ship was about to blow apart. In a panic, he might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat to trail behind the ship on a tow line until the danger passed. If the line snapped in the rough seas, the lifeboat would have been left behind as the Mary Celeste sailed away empty. This theory of the alcohol fumes remains one of the most plausible, yet it fails to explain everything found on board. The hatch covers were found secure, and there was no evidence of scorching or fire anywhere in the hold. Additionally, the 9 empty barrels were made of red oak, which is porous and likely leaked naturally over the voyage. If the fumes were so strong as to cause an evacuation, the smell would have lingered for the boarding party to detect. The puzzle pieces simply did not fit together to form a coherent picture of the events. Then there are the theories that delve into the supernatural and the terrors of the deep, unknown ocean. Sailors spoke of a seaquake or a waterspout that could have struck the ship, causing a moment of extreme panic. Such an event might have made the ship feel like it was sinking rapidly, leading to the abandonment. But the ship was found dry above the waterline, and the items in the cabin were not thrown about. A violent natural phenomenon would have left scars on the vessel that were simply not there. Others whispered of a madness that descended upon the crew, born from something ancient rising from the depths. The Atlantic is home to legends of giant squids and sea monsters that can drive men insane with fear. While unlikely to be a physical attack, the psychological toll of the isolation, and the sea could have broken them. Ergot poisoning from contaminated bread was also suggested as a cause for mass hallucinations and hysteria. Under the grip of a collective delusion, they might have seen the ship as a burning inferno and fled into the waves. The trial in Gibraltar ended without a definitive conclusion, leaving the fate of the crew officially unresolved. The salvagers received a fraction of the expected payment, as the court remained unconvinced of their innocence. The Mary Celeste was released, but her reputation was forever tarnished, marked as a ship of ill omen. Sailors refused to sign on for her future voyages, believing that she was a vessel that devoured souls. She changed owners 17 times over the next dozen years, bringing bad luck and financial ruin to all who possessed her. The tragedy of Captain Briggs and his family is the human heart of this enduring maritime mystery. Sarah Briggs had left behind a son, Arthur, at home with his grandmother to accompany her husband. Her letters revealed a woman who loved the sea, but loved her family more, and her loss was felt deeply. Little Sophia was just a toddler, a life barely begun before it was swallowed by the indifferent ocean. Their empty cabin with the toys and the melodeon stands as a silent monument to a life interrupted. The final years of the Mary Celeste were as tragic and ignoble as the mystery that made her famous. In 1885, her last captain, Gilman Parker, conspired to wreck her for the insurance money. He ran her aground on a reef off the coast of Haiti, intending to sink her and claim the payout. But the sturdy ship refused to sink, sitting stubbornly on the coral, as if defying her own destruction. The fraud was discovered, and Captain Parker was ruined, dying shortly after in disgrace and poverty. The wreckage of the Mary Celeste rotted away on the Rochelois reef, beaten by the sun and the surf. She slowly disintegrated, taking her secrets with her into the sand and coral of the Caribbean Sea. No trace of the lifeboat or the 10 people who boarded it was ever found, despite extensive searches. They simply vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind a legacy of questions. The ocean is vast and deep, and it keeps its dead hidden well away from the prying eyes of the living. Over the decades, countless investigators and authors have tried to solve the riddle of the Mary Celeste. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a short story that sensationalized the event, adding details that blurred fact and fiction. His story cemented the ship in the public imagination as the archetypal ghost ship of the Victorian era. But fiction could never match the chilling reality of the empty deck and the still, warm breakfast. The truth is likely far simpler and far more tragic than any story we can invent. Modern forensic analysis has revisited the evidence using technology unavailable to the investigators of the 19th century. Experts have analyzed the weather patterns, the construction of the ship, and the properties of the cargo. Most agree that a combination of a faulty pump, a little water in the hold, and a panic over the alcohol fumes is likely. Yet probability is not certainty, and the absence of the lifeboat and bodies leaves a permanent gap. We can theorize, but we can never know what was said in those final desperate moments. Imagine the scene on that cold November morning as the decision was made to abandon the ship. The fear in the eyes of the crew, the crying of the child, and the grim face of the captain. The rush to the lifeboat, the lowering of the ropes, and the push away from the high wooden hull. Watching the Mary Celeste drift away safe and sound, while they bobbed in a fragile shell on the open ocean. The realization of their mistake must have been the supreme horror as they watched their salvation sail away. The sea is a place of silence where screams are drowned out by the wind and the crashing waves. If they called out to the receding ship, their voices would have been lost in the vastness of the Atlantic. Exposure, thirst, and hunger would have set in quickly claiming them one by one in the open boat. It is a slow and agonizing end, a stark contrast to the sudden violence of a storm or battle. The ocean granted them no mercy and no grave marker to tell the world where they rest. Today, the name Mary Celeste is synonymous with unexplained disappearances and the uncanny nature of the sea. It serves as a reminder of how fragile human life is when pitted against the elemental forces of nature. We build our ships of wood and steel and navigate with stars and satellites, believing we are masters. But the ocean is ancient and indifferent, and it can swallow us whole without a trace. The mystery endures because it taps into our primal fear of the unknown and the unseen. The ghost of the Mary Celeste sails on in our collective memory, a vessel that will never reach its port. It is a story told in whispers on the decks of ships and in the warmth of coastal taverns. It warns us that no matter how prepared we are, or how skilled the captain, the sea holds the final card. We look out at the horizon and wonder what other secrets are drifting out there waiting to be found. The empty wheel still spins in our minds, guided by the hands of ghosts. In the end, we are left with the image of the open ocean and the silence that follows a tragedy. The wind still blows over the spot where the Mary Celeste was found drifting, but it tells no tales. The souls of Benjamin, Sarah, Sophia, and the crew are part of the water now. They are the unseen watchers in the mist, the sudden chill in the air, and the unexplained creak of the hull. They are the eternal crew of a ship that sails forever in the twilight of history. So next time you stand by the shore and look out at the gray, unyielding expanse of the sea, remember them. Remember the toys on the floor, the unsmoked pipes, and the meal left untouched on the table. Remember that the line between safety and oblivion is as thin as a wooden plank on a deep ocean. The Mary Celeste is not just a story of the past, but a warning for the future. The sea never gives back what it takes, and some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The dread lingers not in the violence of their end, but in the quietness of their disappearance. It is the unfinished business, the interrupted life, and the lack of closure that haunts us most. The Mary Celeste drifts through the fog of time, a symbol of the ultimate unknown that awaits us all. And as the darkness falls over the water, we can almost hear the faint sound of a child crying. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the Mary Celeste is the darkest secret of them all. Perhaps they are still out there in some form, sailing the phantom currents of a spectral ocean, bound to the ship that betrayed them, or the lifeboat that became their coffin. They drift eternally. The mystery is their monument, and the silence of the sea is their everlasting eulogy. We turn away from the water shivering, not just from the cold, but from the truth we feel in our bones. We are small, and the dark water is deep, and it is always waiting. The story of the Mary Celeste ends where it began, in the cold, indifferent embrace of the Atlantic. It is a circle of fear that cannot be broken, a riddle that has no answer key. The vanishing of the crew remains the perfect locked room mystery set upon the shifting stage of the sea. And as long as ships sail and men venture into the deep, the legend will continue to grow. For in the heart of every sailor, there is the fear that they too could simply vanish. Let the tale of the Mary Celeste stand as a testament to the power of the unknown. Let it be a reminder to respect the sea and the mysteries it hides beneath its waves. The crew may be gone, but their story has achieved a form of immortality that few attain. They are the lost, the vanished, the taken, and they will never be forgotten. The horizon is empty now, but if you look closely, you might just see a sail in the mist. And when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, blurring the world into shades of gray, listen closely. You might hear the creak of rigging, the snap of a sail, or the hollow sound of footsteps on a wooden deck. It is the Mary Celeste sailing through the ether, searching for the harbor she never reached. The mystery is not just what happened to them, but why it continues to haunt us so deeply. It is the fear that we too could step out of our lives and leave not a trace behind. The final thought is one of profound isolation, a tiny boat alone in the center of a limitless ocean. The sun sets, and the stars come out in different witnesses to a tragedy unfolding in slow motion. The darkness swallows them up, and the water closes over their memory, leaving only the ship behind. The Mary Celeste sails on empty and silent, a ghost story written in wood and canvas. And the ocean rolls on endless and deep, keeping its secrets forever. As we close the book on this chilling chapter of maritime history, the unease remains settled deep in our chests. The Mary Celeste is more than a ship. She is a vessel of our collective nightmares. She reminds us that the world is full of dark corners where the light of reason cannot reach. And somewhere out there, In the vast, crushing dark of the Atlantic, the truth lies sleeping, waiting perhaps for the next ship to drift too close to the veil. The legacy of the Mary Celeste is a cold draft in a warm room, a shadow in the corner of your eye. It is the story that refuses to die, the mystery that defies every attempt at explanation. It leaves us with a lingering dread, a suspicion that there are forces we cannot control or understand. And as you lay your head down tonight, remember the empty ship and the missing crew. For in the silence of the night, the ghosts of the Mary Celeste are still drifting